Well, our theme this morning, you can see it on the screen behind me there, is the theme of finding peace. And what we're doing as a church through November, you've probably heard of Morevember, and you see chaps in the community all various stages of trying to grow a moustache. It's actually a really good idea, Morevember, and it's something worth looking at, not necessarily the growing moustache, but maybe supporting that work. It was originally set up to raise awareness of prostate cancer, which affects the lives of many, many men in Britain today, and we're very conscious of that and aware of that as a family, as a church family here. But I understand the Morevember thing now has been expanded and extended, not only to raise awareness of prostate cancer, but also of men's health generally. You're probably aware that the largest killer of men in the UK, and I think globally now, under the age of 45, is the awful reality of suicide. And so a great deal of work needs to be done here. By the way, that's something I'm particularly very interested in. I think it's a real shame that churches are not responding to what is obviously a real crisis in our communities amongst men, and we should be. I think that's something I would encourage you to pray about. So what we've decided to do is not to have Morevember on Sunday mornings in November, but to have Morevember. Because as Christians, we believe what the Bible tells us, which is that there is so much more to life to be found in Jesus Christ. And so what we've done is we've chosen 3 themes throughout November for our little series of Morevember. And this morning, the first of those is the theme of finding peace. You come back next week, we'll be looking at finding love. And on the last Sunday morning in November, we'll be looking at finding forgiveness. And we've chosen those 3 themes, peace, love, and forgiveness, because it's our experience and our conviction that these are 3 of the biggest things that people long for in life and look for. Today is a very important day. It's Remembrance Sunday. You may have watched the Remembrance service or program on BBC last night. It's always a very moving occasion, isn't it? The veterans from various campaigns are acknowledged. The nation comes together in a sense of gratitude. It's a reminder, though, not only do we remember those who have given their lives in sacrifice, but it's a reminder, sadly, that our world is sometimes capable of great self-destruction and is always in need of peace. Remembrance Day really started with the acknowledgement of the end of World War I. The 11th hour on the 11th day of the 11th month, 1918, saw the cessation of hostilities in World War I. 40 million deaths, approximately. And it was referred to, of course, the end of World War I as the war to end all wars. It was the first great mechanized warfare, industrialized warfare, whole-scale slaughter. It had been so horrific, so horrendous, that many commentators and politicians spoke about it in the hope and the longing that this war would be the war to end all wars. 21 years later, we engaged in what we commonly know as World War II, at the end of which not 40 million had lost their lives, but military people and civilians, estimates range between 70 to 85 million people perished in World War II. Approximately 3% of the world's population at that time. And so the troubles go on. Falklands, the Gulf War, the Bosnia conflict, Afghanistan, all of these things remind us not only that it's right to remember those who sacrificed, but it's important to remember that we live in a world that, despite how optimistic it may try to be, and confident in its own abilities, it is nevertheless a world that is always capable of great destruction and is in need for peace. And when people speak about peace, it can be very moving, can't it? I don't know if you saw on Breakfast Time TV, 93-year-old Harry Billinge. He was a D-Day veteran, and he's pioneered and campaigned for a renewed memorial to those who gave their lives at D-Day. It was very, very moving, wasn't it, to see that elderly man speak so honestly, not only about the traumas of war, but the hope for peace as well. Peace is a fragile thing. One historian called peace as that moment in history when armies pause to reload. I might say that's a very cynical view, but I think it's one based and rooted in the reality of our history books. And of course, the truth is that as we gather here this morning, in the freedoms that we have, when you came to church this morning, you came completely freely. We don't live under a totalitarian regime. Of course, this weekend is the remembrance as well, not only of the end of the cessation of hostilities of World War I and World War II, but it's also the remembrance of the bringing down of the Berlin Wall 30 years ago this weekend. That wall separated people, but it was a wall that was built because of a totalitarian regime that thrived on suspicion, fear, resentment, and hatred. These are the realities of the world in which we live. And I'm sure there's not one of us here this morning who wouldn't say that peace is not a good idea. Peace is a wonderful idea, and it is a great thing. But of course, the truth is, you don't need to have faced war on a battlefield or to have lived under a dictatorship to be somebody who longs for peace. We all do. The need for peace goes to the very depths of our experience as a human being. So, for example, we know what it is to long for peace if we find ourselves in a destructive or fractious relationship. Maybe it's tensions with your parents or with your partner or with your children, or difficulties in the workplace, or disputes between you and a neighbor or something like that. We don't like things like that. We long for peace. And of course, we all know what it is to appreciate the concept of peace. Maybe you've had a really busy day at work, or you've had a very demanding day, or you've had a particularly demanding day with your children or with relatives or something like that. And that moment when you find yourself on your own and you're able to sink into your favorite chair at the end of that kind of day, and you think, peace at last. You'll know what it is to experience that and to appreciate it. On a beautiful day like today, going for a walk down on the beach at Kevensheeden, we appreciate getting away from stuff. We enjoy peace. But of course, the reality is finding peace in our community today is becoming all the more challenging. We're under great pressure today to keep up with one another, particularly with information, with news. Now, all of that is normal human behavior. We're curious about one another, and we love to hear the stories from one another. Now, technology, and particularly social media, have made these things in all reality a great burden to us. Have you ever heard of FOMO? FOMO. It's a real condition. It means fear of missing out. There are many people today whose lives are driven by the fear of missing out. So in the night hours, as they're trying to sleep, the phone buzzes on the table next to your bed, and the temptation is to pick it up and find out what's going on with your friends' post and text and all of those things. It's becoming increasingly more difficult to find peace in our world. And not only is there the pressure to keep up with others and the pressure of the continual buzz of social media and social information, there is the ever-present worry of living in a world like ours. Our community, our country, is not particularly a peaceful place at the moment. There are deep tensions, deep divisions. It seems to me that people are becoming increasingly unhappy and uncertain about the future. And with all of that, confusion and anger soon surfaces. And tragically, as we've already acknowledged right at the beginning of this message, for some, the pressure of trying to find peace in modern living has become unbearable. I looked last night on the Samaritan's website and noted to my horror that the statistics for suicide in the UK rose by 10.6% last year. There are an increasing number of people in our nation who find the idea of peace attractive, but in reality, impossible. How about you this morning? Where do you find your peace? Do you have peace? There are, of course, many things you can do to try and find peace, at least a kind of rest in our busy world. Before I became a minister, I was a physiotherapist. I worked in the University Hospital of Wales in Cardiff, and I ran a stress management clinic. In fact, I had an email this week from about an old colleague who worked with me when I was there, who's about to retire. And the health authority, in their wisdom, have invited me to his leaving do to give a speech. It's rather nice of them. I may well tell them a little bit of what I'm telling you this morning about where peace is really found. But people were referred to us who were struggling with the pressures of modern life, as it was then back in the 80s. We would do our best to explain to them some of the things that were happening to their mind and to their body and to provide them with coping strategies. And for some people today, offering you help with the problem of worry and anxiety and stress is really big business. I came across this place. It's naturally in the States, in Malibu. It's called The Ranch. But if you've got $7,800, I'm not quite sure how much that is in British pounds, you can spend a week there. If you're really enthusiastic, you can spend $30,000 for 4 weeks. And they offer you all sorts of amazing things. I actually downloaded a typical day in the life of the ranch in Malibu. They'll wake you up at 5:30 to Tibetan chimes. And then they'll take you through a series of morning stretches, then feed you breakfast of coconut parfait topped with fresh fruit and granola. Sounds wonderful, doesn't it? That's $7,800 a week. They'll then take you for a long hike in the mountains, feed you and then give you a nap after lunch, and then take you through low-impact strength conditioning through circuit training-based classes, followed by restorative yoga. And people pay huge money for that to try and find rest for their troubles. But how about you? Where do you find your peace? At the heart of Christianity is a message and a person who speaks specifically to the human desire for peace. Towards the end of the New Testament, in the book of James, two very important questions are asked, and they're asked within the context of warfare. Where do wars come from? Or to use particularly the words in the verse that we find in the book of James, what causes fights and quarrels among you? And the answer is given in the form of a second question. Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? Now, James's point is really clear. Physical global conflict begins with personal inward conflict. The desires that battle within you. I think some of the folks who go to the ranch in Malibu, who are able to have that kind of money, must be pretty well-appointed people in life. They've probably got excellent jobs, earning huge amounts of money, that they can afford to pay $30,000 for a month there. And yet for all that money and for all that success, there is still something that's driving them in the search for peace and well-being. James says that in all of us there are desires that battle within you. Might be someone today who says to me, well, actually, on paper, my life looks pretty good. I'm fairly healthy physically and mentally. I've got friends. I've got family. I live in a country where we're not at war with anyone right now. I may not be very happy with the government or what's going on politically, but I'm grateful that we're in a country that's at peace. And you might say, actually, when I think about it, I've got a pretty good life. I've got people who understand me. I've got family who love me. And yet you say deep down inside, there is this kind of trouble and this restlessness. And I just don't really feel content. And maybe you're someone this morning who says, well, I've tried to find that contentment, and you've looked for it in different places. Maybe you've tried to find that contentment in your job. And so you throw yourself into that, and you enjoy your job, and it's exciting when you're there, and it's exhilarating. But it still won't deal with that deep down personal restlessness. Or maybe you've tried to find that peace in your family, and you care for them and you love them, and there are many wonderful happy times with them, but it still hasn't brought that sense of inward peace. Maybe you've tried to find it in reading and enjoying life and music and films and whatever it may be, and entertainment, but at the end of the day, however distracting these things may be, there is always deep down personal restlessness. What James calls the desires that battle within you. And of course, we do try and distract ourselves from this. There are times when we try and give ourselves a mental holiday, take time out, maybe go for a good night out with your friends, have a laugh, a bottle of wine, drugs, sex, sleep, music, good book, film, mindfulness. All of these things are offered to you today in our culture. But all they become is a little mental and emotional holiday. They don't really deal with the desires that battle within you. Now, the wonderful thing about Christianity is that Jesus tells us and shows us in many places that he has come to deal with those desires that battle within you, and he has come to bring you peace. You say a lot of people have offered peace in our world. Sometimes they've been terribly optimistic, and that optimistic has been based on false ideas. There will be peace in our time, one British Prime Minister promised when we were on the verge of a global war. He was wrong. It was based on good intention. It was a longing and a desire, but it was completely fatuous. So you say to me this morning, why should I listen to you when you tell me about the peace that Jesus offers? Why should his peace be any different from the promise of peace of Neville Chamberlain some years ago, which proved to be fake? Well, I think one of the reasons we should listen to Jesus is that he tells us, and these are his own words in John 14, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give you as the world gives." I do not give you as the world gives. What does he mean by that? What he means is this, that the peace I'm offering you is like nothing else you'll find in this world. Not even the peace of mind that the ranch in Malibu can offer you. The peace that Jesus offers us is entirely unique to anything else you might find in this world. It's different to the peace that you might find in something like mindfulness, or talking through your problems with your friends, or getting help from a professional. Those things are really helpful and valuable. But the peace Jesus offers us is entirely unique, and it's free. Even before his birth, This connection between peace and Jesus was being laid down in the Bible. In a few weeks' time, I'm sure we'll be hearing these words from the prophet Isaiah. To us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father. Do you remember? Prince of Peace. The Bible argues that Jesus is the Prince of Peace. He's the real expert on peace. And it is peace that Jesus Christ is offering you and offering me in and through the good news of all that he has done. Now you might say, certainly the life of Jesus looks like a life of peace. When you read the Gospels, he's not always going around shouting at people. We don't read of him trying to raise an army or stirring up insurrection against the Romans and telling people to take up arms. Jesus doesn't do that. So you say, of course, he's a good example of peace. If you know your Bible really well, you know that when they came to arrest him, one of his disciples actually took out a sword to defend Jesus and ended up cutting off the ear of one of those who'd come to arrest Jesus. Do you know what Jesus did in response to that? You may not know this. He said, "No more of this." He touched the man's ear, healed him. And you hear that and you say, well, yes, of course, Jesus is about peace. And you know from the stories of the Bible that Jesus is gentle and approachable, the friend of the broken, the friend of the outcast. And so you say, of course, that's the peace that Jesus offers. But if we're really going to be fair to what Jesus says and is recorded in the Gospels, we have to say, as true as those observations are, they're only the tip of the iceberg. There is a whole load more to do with peace that we're told is found in Jesus Christ. Right at the beginning, I read to you a passage, and it came from Mark's Gospel, and it was the story of Jesus calming a storm when he was on the Sea of Galilee. He was on the Sea of Galilee in a little boat with his disciple friends. These boats were not particularly big. In fact, a few years ago, I had the privilege of going with Karen, my wife, to Israel. And by the Sea of Galilee, there's a lovely big museum there where they've actually recovered a boat that they think would be fairly typical of the kinds of boats that Jesus and his disciples were using. And they've recovered it out of the mud, and the people who understand how to do these things have preserved it, and it's there in this museum. And I guess, from my memory serves me right, it's probably about the width of from one wall to another wall here. So it's not massive. And Jesus is in one of these boats, and he's there with his disciples. And while he's there, and they're on the Sea of Galilee, there is this terrible and destructive storm that comes up. And Jesus speaks to the winds and the waves, and he speaks to the storm, and he's able to deal with it, and he calms it with those words, "Peace, be still." Now, I think in that story, what we are seeing, that the storm, in many ways, is a kind of illustration or metaphor for the storms that go on in our hearts. It's a picture that not only as there can be chaos and storms in the natural world, there can be chaos and storms inside of us. And just as Jesus speaks to that, the storm on the Sea of Galilee, he also speaks to the storms in our hearts and in our lives. The storm that the disciples were facing was beyond their ability to control. "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" That's what they thought was happening. They believed with certainty that the storm was so great, the water was coming inside the boat, they were going to go down, and they were going to drown. But that question don't you care, that's asked of Jesus, is a very powerful and a very important question. And it is the reminder, the way in which Jesus responds to the disciples' distress, that yes, he does care. So maybe this morning you're here and you have troubles and concerns and fears in your heart. Maybe they're fears over your own life or your family or where our world is going. That story reminds us straight away that Jesus understands. He does care. He cares about you with your fears and your distresses. And in that story, when Jesus spoke to the winds and the waves, it says he rebuked them. Quiet, be still. And Mark records the wind died down and it was completely calm. But then he asked his disciples this question: why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith? And you know, friends, at that moment, I think Jesus begins to make the connection between the peace he's offering and how we need to respond to him. His concern is, have you no faith? And if we're to find the peace that Jesus offers, the peace that surpasses understanding, central to finding that peace is the experience of faith. Faith in you and faith in me towards Jesus. You see, the Bible presents Jesus as the great peace bringer. He is God with us, not to judge us and to condemn us, but to rescue us and to deliver us. Not just from difficulties in a boat on the Sea of Galilee 2,000 years ago, but to rescue us from the distresses which we know within us, which the Bible says are caused by the problem of sin. And so it was 2,000 years ago that Jesus Christ on our behalf took on the problem of sin. Sin is the great stress generator. Sin is the power behind our fears and our anxieties and our distresses. And 2,000 years ago, Christ uniquely took it on.